This Choircast podcast is brought to you by High Minds. Join host Andy Colenso and Matthew J. DiStefano as they tackle culture, justice, spirituality, and all the big questions shaping our world. High Minds isn't about talking points or hot takes. It's about deep, insightful conversation that inspires and challenges. Tune in to explore new angles, question the status quo, and elevate your thinking. Listen to High Minds wherever you get your podcasts.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney and Bethany Shea.
Hello. I'm stuck in a loop, John. No. Welcome back to the podcast. I am Nat Turney, your hostess with the mostest, with my brother John, as always, up in the other right-hand square of the Hollywood Squares. And if you got that reference, then you're as old as we are. But
yep.
Who would you be on Hollywood Squares, John? Would you be Charles Nelson Riley?
Paul Lynde.
Paul, I knew you were going to say Paul Lynde. Of course you're going to say Paul Lynde. Fine, I'll be Charles Nelson Riley. Paul Lynde was an underrated man.
Yeah, for sure.
Wasn't he? No, I'm thinking of somebody else. I'm thinking of the guy. There was a guy that was on that show a lot, and he wrote a lot of theme songs. Like he wrote the theme song for Love Boat. There was all these themes. His name will come up. Short guy, really short.
I know who you're talking about, but I cannot.
You can see him, right? You can picture him. It was okay. Anyway, none of this matters because this is the podcast. But this is some of the tomfoolery that you can expect as we go along. But again, this is a podcast we call "This Is Not Church." You knew that because you clicked on the link somewhere, someplace, Spotify, iTunes, someplace, and you were like, I wonder. Well, wonder no more. Here we are. We are always so very fortunate to have awesome guests with us, and that's what we do. Is we talk about all kinds of stuff. So today's no exception. We're joined today by Jack R. Reese, who spent more than 50 years in ministry, serving as a senior pastor, university professor, seminary dean, campus minister, and community activist. He has taught courses in preaching, worship, ministry, social change, and New Testament texts. Beyond the church and academy, he has led nonprofit work addressing poverty and racism, creating pathways for personal and economic advancement through education in the humanities. Reese is the author of At the Blue Hole, Elegy for a Church on the Edge, The Broken Body, Embracing the Peace of Christ in a Fragmented Church, and also Grace Sideways, Field Notes of a Doubting Believer. Jack, welcome to the podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thanks for having me today.
And we are so glad that you're here. Looks like you have a fairly distinguished body of work. So I suspect we'll have lots of things to talk about. But if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit more of an introduction to yourself, bios, they say, they say what they say, but anything you'd like to enlighten us about, maybe your spiritual journey, what has kind of led you down this path, that would be interesting for us to start off with.
Like Nat, I grew up in West Texas.
Woohoo! And survived.
I grew up in a denomination that I would call evangelical adjacent. I have never identified with evangelicals then or now, yet our particular and peculiar group participates in so many of the instincts and concerns and issues. And so I find myself constantly in those conversations. So I grew up in Abilene, so I grew up in the Church of Christ. So you may be aware of Churches of Christ. We have a kind of a dark side of sectarianism and exclusivism that has been our bane over the years. The couple advantages of that fellowship. One is that we were so isolated from the others that we missed most of the controversies. We missed fundamentalist controversies in the early 20th century. I was in college during the inerrancy debates, and I missed those debates.
You didn't miss much.
I did not miss much. I'm glad you missed it. But the other thing is we are a group that always emphasized reason. We didn't always practice it well, but for me, it meant studying under folks who had fine degrees, education, who asked questions. So for me, college was studying with professors from Harvard and Yale and Princeton and Chicago, asking the questions that pushed my doubt button early on. Doubt was not our enemy in college. Certainty was the enemy.
Amen to that.
And so I feel blessed in many ways to have had that as an experience, and I have never lost my sense of doubt. There are just all kinds of things I do not know. And the older I get, the less I know, for sure.
To me, that's the hallmark of intelligence, is recognizing that the more you learn, the less you know. And that was when I'm with you exactly. John and I have had the same exact experience. I would say our upbringing was evangelical. It was just evangelical. We didn't miss all of that stuff, sadly, which is why I can speak authoritatively on how much you didn't miss. Doubt was the enemy. Certainty was the goal. Biblical inerrancy meant we couldn't ask questions. John was slapped down many times in Sunday school for asking obvious questions like, really? All the animals on one boat? I don't think so. How did the kangaroos get there? Where did the penguins go? What did the lions eat? There's many, many questions. Never mind the fact that an 80-year-old dude built a giant boat. So anyway, that we were steeped in that as kids, indoctrinated. I honestly think that's not too strong a word to use for it. And but it was doubt that pulled me out of it. I've always, my moniker lately is just like you said, that certainty is the enemy. Doubt pushes us on to ask good questions. But I'm not sure if you're like me, but I just find there's more questions. My hope is now just to find better questions. To hope to be asking the right questions, even if I don't always get satisfactory answers for them. Does that make sense to you?
Well, absolutely. My first job as a full-time minister, I was a senior pastor of a large church. It became even larger after I left, and serves as a fairly prominent mega church today. Good folks, I have good memories. But I remember teaching a class in Romans and presented a couple of options as to what certain verses might mean. It could be this; these scholars say that. Could mean something else; these scholars say that. And then I went on, and folks started pushing back at me. He said, "Well, what's the answer?" And I said, "I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. It could be this. I see both sides." And afterwards, a couple of guys came up to me and said, "We hired you to give us the answers." And I said, "No, sir, you hired me to ask the questions."
Yeah.
So no, the questions are far more important than the answers.
Yeah. I think that's the experience of a lot of, especially first-time pastors and ministers, is that trying to live up to that expectation that you know everything, or that you know enough, or that you even know more than the average person. And the other thing about the traditions that John and I, we didn't grow up in one single church, but we did grow up in a stream of Christianity that did not encourage us to pursue education. So it wasn't until my 40s that I started reading or caring about the credentials of people that I was reading and wondering, what gives you the right to say? There's so many lay people writing books, like me. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I started reading more scholarly books and started trying to find more academic approaches to some things, and found that there were people out there who were really, really smart, who were wrestling with really, really hard questions. And there turns out there's more than one way to read Romans. Turns out, you can read it poorly, or you can read it, like a Doug Campbell or somebody does, and bring all kinds of other stuff to bear on it and go, oh, maybe this is more of a dialogue than an instruction manual. So the Bible became infinitely more interesting and more fascinating when I took it out of its box and tried to, or didn't continue to try to make it say what I wanted or needed it to say. So was it Brian Zahnd who said, I'm sure he stole it from somebody, but said something to the effect that the Bible is a Rorschach test. It says more about the reader than it does about God. I mean, it really exposes us when we use our interpretive lenses, and we have to go, okay, well, why did I read it that way through this lens? And, so very, very cool stuff. But,
I find it, in fact, difficult to understand. We've got some preachers, church leaders out there that will call doubt a sin.
Yeah.
And my mind doesn't grasp what it means to say, I know for sure this or that or the other. So, I mean, all doubt does is drive us towards humility and without judging everyone else, condemning people who disagree with us, or claiming that I know exactly what God wants for me here or there.
Yeah.
That's those who push that, it seems to me, have never read the Psalms, which are just
right. Full of, yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of, David wrestles all the time with why God has done certain things. And yeah, I'm with you on that. I think it's telling, and I cringe even to say the words, I know for sure anything. I've really been diving into science more lately, listening to and reading biologists and anthropologists and things. And the one thing I've come away with from listening to actual people with, degrees and, people who've spent their lives studying these things is things like the idea that you can prove anything with a text is silly. The idea that you can prove anything beyond some very rudimentary facts is silly. So the second you're locked into thinking you know what the Bible says or whatever, it just means you stop looking, which means you stop growing. So I appreciate guys like you who are still pushing the edge, pushing the boundary. I think that's really necessary. John, you had a question. I think I cut you off, didn't you?
Well, I was just talking about, you're talking about doubt. And one of the things you talk about is doubt as how do you say it? Like a catalyst for growth.
Yeah.
And what exactly do you mean when you're talking about growth from doubt?
Yeah, Frederick Buechner said famously, doubts are the ants in the pants of faith. They drive you to seek and to ask and to knock. I do think there's a difference between doubt and unbelief or disbelief, though that's not a fine edge, and I'm not sure I always know the difference. And sometimes I find myself there too. But doubt is in that position, perched to listen, to look, to ask different questions or questions from different angles. Doubt keeps us from saying, this crisis happened and God did this and God caused that and God made it happen for this reason and God saved these people for that purpose. I'm aware of that keenly. You all may have heard of the great floods that took place in the Hill Country last July 4th out at Hunt, Texas, in Kerr County. 136 or 7 died. We were supposed to be out there that day. We couldn't get out because of all the water. It took us a while to figure out why and how bad things were, but part of what happened in the days after, just listening to the stories of people saying, well, God sent that flood because, or, the person who was responsible for children, he was saved in order to do this or that. I am really uncomfortable with naming what God is doing and who God is in our circumstance as if we knew for sure. Because it would require us to say, God somehow decided to kill 130 plus people, including children, that there was some purpose for that, or some reason that God, I'm not willing to make that journey. That doesn't seem like the God that I know.
Yeah, that was terrible. Obviously I live out here, San Angelo, my hometown, the town I call home now, got a bunch of that as well. We had a bunch of flooding here, and not nearly to the degree that they had in Kerr County. That kids camp that was flooded out was, it was the worst of all timings. For something like that to happen in the middle of the night, and to even opine that there was a purpose behind it boggles the mind. But the John Pipers of the world would say that God gets glory even in our suffering, even when He causes that suffering, and that to me is that's a bridge too far. I just can't go there. And it does cause me to wrestle, though. I wonder if you would, this is a little far afield maybe from what we came to talk about, but how do you reconcile what, something like what we inherently know about the nature and the character of God, and then certain things that occurred in the Old Testament where way more people were killed in a flood, and God commanded genocides, and God seems to be okay with things like slavery. And how do we reconcile that? How do we approach the biblical texts honestly and say, or make any sense of it? I guess that's sort of a broad question, but for a scholar such as yourself, that should be an easy one.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's easy for anyone, then don't listen to them.
Right.
My first answer is I don't know. And I say that seriously. I really don't know. And if it's not troubling, then we're not thinking, we're not reading well. Of course, it's troubling. What I keep coming back to is the sense that Scripture itself is incarnational, which means that it wears the clothes of the world around it, and we should not expect passages that are dealing with certain times and contexts would contain within them some kind of modern understanding of any number of things, whether how the creation went, what the cosmos looks like. But it does strike me in those passages in which there are killings of thousands or tens of thousands, et cetera, how similar that literature is to the literature of the other nations of its time. We did this, we slayed all those people in the name of our God. And I'm wondering how much of that is just looking at literature that in so many respects is like the literature of his day. We don't have external evidence of how many people died here or there or someplace else. And if we get lost in the details of deaths in a battle, we really miss, I think, a larger point, because the point is, at least rarely, we kill those people or God slayed those people, but it has more to do with God's faithfulness in some way. And I want to find myself in those passages. I'm not able to explain those passages away. I'm not able to embrace them as normative. Certainly not normative for our time. Certainly not using it.
Right, not prescriptive.
No, it's not prescriptive, and it's certainly not describing how Americans should fight battles as if those passages were meant somehow to apply to us. But yeah, they're troublesome passages.
No, I think there's a lot of truth in what you say there. I do sense a lot of chest thumping in some of that, and it's not hard. You don't have to look too terribly hard at the literature of the ancient world and see the Babylonian texts and see the different things that I don't know. One approach I've seen some scholars take is to view the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible as polemic in some ways, where they're sort of telling their own stories to critique the stories that they were indoctrinated into in their captivity in Babylon. And that, okay, I mean, there may well be some truth to that. It seems a little neat, but there's certainly probably there's something to that, I think. But I'm unwilling to do what Marcion did and just say, well, the Old Testament God is evil, and therefore we can just discount all of that. Although I don't know how yet. Like you, I do think it's instructive. I think the hard part for us is parsing out what the instruction is. Like, what are we to learn from this story of conquest? Certainly it's not, like you said, it's not an instruction for us to go and, it was misused to justify manifest destiny. It was misused by those in the South to justify chattel slavery. It was, so I think you can look at it on its face at a very surface level and go, well, God blessed it then. Certainly this is what we're supposed to do. But I choose rather to wrestle with it. And I think that's a good place to be. And all of that to say, I don't know either. And I'm getting more and more comfortable with that. That seems to be, if you can't be authoritative, at least be honest. At the very least, be humble and say, I don't know. I don't know.
I agree. The whole slavery issue, obviously it's concerning when you go to Scripture, Old Testament and New Testament. Yeah. And you don't have a condemnation.
No, that's
of slavery. I remember Wayne Meeks from Yale was on our campus and talked about the whole slavery issue through the lens of the pre-Civil War theologians in the South and in the North. And he said the Southern scholars were better exegetes than the abolitionist scholars. If you just go and look just this passage by this passage, what this pericope meant, what those words meant, you could find a way to come up with defending slavery. You have to stand back and ask some larger questions. There are some theological concerns that are overriding, and if you just kind of bracket those out and look at these 6 verses and those 3 verses and what that original word meant without seeing the sweeping movement of God in the world. So narrow exegesis without larger theological instincts to look at God's nature and God's heart, we may end up taking passages that were applied to the slavery of its day, which was very different, by the way, than American slavery. Slavery in the Greco-Roman world was very different than our slavery. It's not that it wasn't bad, it was very bad, but it was not, in most cases, the chattel slavery. But to use that as a defense to own people, it's an argument that can't be made. You have to get broader than just simple exegesis of passage.
I would agree totally that Greco-Roman slavery is a different animal. Israelite slavery in Exodus and Leviticus, not so much though. No, it's fairly explicit that you can own people forever and you can pass them on to your kids. You don't have to exegete very hard to go, where do we get our slaves? Oh, from the nations that surround us and from the foreigners who dwell amongst us. And how long can we own them? Forever. And can we beat them? As long as they don't die right away. It's pretty severe. And I do believe that the more, for those living in pre-Civil War and Civil War in the Civil War South, it's easy to read that and just read your own biases into it. The one difference I think is certain is that slavery was not racial or ethnic based. It was, who are the weak among us and who can we conquer? That's a little different. But the Israelites, it blows my mind because they just come out of slavery in Exodus. They'd had that done to them, and the law they get from God says, "Okay, your turn." And there's no, I think most Christians, I will say this: the other, this is part 3 or 4 of the misindoctrination of John and Nat. We didn't spend much time in the Old Testament. We were indoctrinated into New Testament, New Covenant theology, and if ever we talked about the Old Testament, it was in broad strokes. It was the Bible stories in Sunday school, which some of them should not be told to children. They're terrible. But and so I think there's a lot of Christians running around who would be shocked to find out some of the things that are actually in that text and that there's no refutation of them. Jesus does not refute them. Paul does not refute them. I think a big reason for that, and I think it was Albert Schweitzer, I can't remember the term he used for it, but essentially, everybody in that time frame expected the end of the world to be imminent. So what's the point in starting a rebellion now? Jesus is coming back any day within the lifetime of his disciples, he said. So there's no reason to go. So slaves, obey your masters. If you're not married, don't get married. Don't have kids. We've got things to do and we have a short amount of time to do it. So I forget anyway, it'll come to me at some point when it doesn't matter anymore. Just like the guy who was on Hollywood Squares, whose name, still don't know. Oh, well, anyway. Let's talk about your work then, specifically in regards to things like poverty and racism and things like that, because those are pretty large areas to cover. What got you into that kind of work?
That is a hard question for me to answer easily. I left 25 years of teaching and academic work. There were a number of reasons why, but I needed to be in another place doing other things. I moved to Dallas, and there's a person there, a friend. I didn't know him well, but I had known him a little bit for the years, who his name is Don Williams, J. McDonald Williams, who had been the CEO of Trammell Crow Commercial Real Estate, just an extraordinary man, a powerful man who walked away from that work in order to care for the poorest of the poor in South Dallas. He asked me if I would, first of all, lead a Clemente course in the humanities, which is kind of a nationwide college-accredited course in the humanities for those living below the poverty level, which was life-changing. And then the next year, I became the CEO of the Foundation for Community Empowerment. My world was almost entirely an African-American world for the 5 years that I was involved in that, first thing that I did was to go to the church where a friend of mine that I had known in graduate school, black pastor named Kenneth R. Green, who was one of the most extraordinary humans I've ever known. I knew him and his wife and his kids, and that's all I knew. But I was not in a position to want to go and to be a part of a church like I'd been part of before. And so I learned what life was like, at least to some degree, as much as one who is as privileged and as entitled as white males are in this world. I learned to begin to see what systemic racism can do to a family, to children, to churches, individuals, and to begin to find means to fight the system on their behalf. So it's a long story. We don't need to go into all of it here, but my life was caught up in dealing with city council and the representatives of Fair Park and fighting for the neighborhood around Fair Park, finding a way to not to give them a voice. They already had a voice, but to liberate their voice so that they could be heard in the city. And some, I think, extraordinary things happened over the years. So my faith walk took a pretty radical turn the years that I was there. I will never see the world the same again. And in many ways, that pastor, that friend, and that congregation saved my life, saved my future, saved my faith. So it was a remarkable experience.
That's amazing. I'm kind of speechless.
Yeah. Well, I remember, in fact, I mentioned this in the book, in Grace Sideways. First day I was on the job, I was at a meeting in a community, an apartment complex that had suffered greatly because of decisions the city had made. And a couple of people came up to me, a couple of the neighbors, and said, how long do you plan to be here? I literally looked at my watch. Well, probably until 3:30 or 4. And they said, no. How long are you going to be here? Because most white people come down here and they can't stand it. They don't want to get their hands dirty. They rush home at the end of every day. How long are you going to be here? And I said, I am here. I live in the community, and I am here. And so that began our journey. So it was a time of immersion and a lot of humor, because the white guy didn't get everything first time or the second time.
Third time or the
yeah. My church called me 1%. That's the proportion of our congregation that I represented. And when I married my wife, Lisa, during that time, they began to call us 2%. But we were both just radically changed by that world. My faith became different because of those experiences.
Yeah, I think a lot of us would benefit from that kind of confrontation with ourselves, really. I don't get as much pushback anymore, but used to get a lot of pushback using the word privilege, just because I think there's just such a misunderstanding about what that word means. As though it meant that I was born rich or I was born untroubled, or no, that's not what that means. It just means for all of our troubles and issues that they're not those issues. I never had to apologize. I have never had to explain, or I've never had to tell my kids and give them very, very, very strict instructions for if and when they're pulled over by the police. Like, these are the things you do. Make sure your hands are visible. Make sure you are polite in the extreme. Make sure. And I know there are, Black families who send their teenage sons, especially out into the world, and just worry and pray that they'll come home. And that's not a worry that we had. I could approach a police officer with very little fear. I was telling a story once about my dad. I got pulled over at my grandmother's funeral. We were driving back to the hotel, and I got pulled over hotel parking lot. My dad just jumped out of his car and ran over to confront the cop. And I'm like, I thought about it later. I'm like, okay, there's privilege on display. That cop did not draw down. That police officer was not afraid for his life. He got mad and told my dad to get the hell back in his car. But for a lot of other people, that would have been a much more of a crisis event. It would have been potentially a deadly encounter. And so that's what I count as privilege for myself. That and the fact that if I don't want to think about racism, systemic or otherwise, for any particular length of time, I don't have to. I can just turn that part of my brain off for a while and just go think about something else. If I want to disengage from politics, same kind of privilege that we don't have when it comes to our LGBTQ brethren, I don't have to think about trans people. I can go for days and days and days and purpose to not think about those issues because I'm not affected on a daily basis. My life isn't threatened by the passage of stupid laws and irrational hatred of such a small group of people. So that to me is privilege. It's the ability to kind of think about those things when I can, sit in my little ivory tower, drink my 2% milk. That's where I thought the name came from. I thought they were making fun of your whiteness. Like 1%, that's the whitest of all milks. That's
funny. I need to think that whole thing now.
There you go. It works on a lot of levels, sir. There's many, many levels. But John and I, over the years have had a chance to talk to Black politicians, many different authors, some who are just remarkable. The lady that wrote about the Black Madonnas when she went on her book.
Christina Cleveland.
Thank you. You're always much better with the names. Just amazing. And then John and I both, John was already doing this because John's much more well-read in these areas than I am, but sent us out looking for, all right, I need to read more books by people of color. I need to find out their perspectives. I need to read. So I read, oh my goodness, the one about the lynching tree. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I can't think of the author.
I read it full through in one sitting and just cried. I just, and I think similar to you had that kind of experience of like, okay, this is a perspective I had not had before. So I applaud you. But talk about this then, if you could, that sort of confluence of racism, poverty, systemic oppression. How has the church done historically? And are you noting a change in the attitudes towards those kinds of things currently, especially in the evangelical world when it comes to issues of racism and poverty?
No, I'm not noticing much change. I wish that there was more awareness, but I have found a retrenchment in the larger evangelical world. I hear often, hey, our nation is based on a meritocracy. It doesn't matter about color. Everyone has an equal opportunity, and there's almost nothing that I can say in response to that can convince them that we do not live in a meritocracy, and that, as you indicated, that they have the privilege to not deal with race at all. The congregation I'm a part of now probably. Well, we reflect the racial demographics of San Antonio. Blacks are about 6%, and that's about what we have in our congregation. We have a number of our church leaders who are Black, but culturally it's a white congregation. And whites miss the microaggressions that our Black members see always and all the time. They are extraordinary, but it's not like we are colorblind. We reflect a white culture, and in many ways push them to the outside. But the denial that we have a racial problem in our country is now virtually ensconced in law in some places. It's certainly deeply ensconced in the rhetoric of some of our politicians. The church isn't doing very well. The church is not much of a witness these days. Obviously, there are exceptions to that, but it's sorry to say criminal. It's evil. What the ignorance, the conscious ignorance of what ethnic minorities in our nation experience on the hands of white people who don't seem to want to know or care. That's extreme. I recognize that because I know that there are exceptions to that. I know that there are exceptions, but it's not enough for it to be an individual exception. I have black friends. I have, I never treat.
Right.
If we deny the system that is continually keeping neighborhoods down, families down, and I've seen too much to not argue against those who believe that we live in a meritocratic nation. The church needs to stand up against the system when the system discriminates against people.
Yeah, it's hard enough to get them to admit it's still a problem. John, I mean, I keep going back to our childhoods, but that's where the foundations were laid for much of this. And if we talked about these things, it was always in terms of look at how well we're doing and how much we've overcome. And the pinnacle of that seemed to be we elected Barack Obama, and then we could all relax and go, whoo, problem solved. And those same people now who lecture us about that one verse in Romans that says God appoints all these leaders and we're supposed to respect the current occupant of the White House spent 8 years trying to destroy that man. One of the great regrets of my life is and let me preface this by saying Barack Obama's not a perfect guy. He's just a politician. However, I didn't enjoy his presidency because I was still a white conservative who, wanted to see his birth certificate and bought into some of the bullshit that went along with that. Now I pine for the days of having an occupant of the White House who can form a sentence coherently and seems thoughtful and kind and genuinely curious. That's one thing. I don't know if you've watched Ted Lasso.
Yeah, not the most recent.
I'm waiting till it's done. I'm praying to God they don't wreck it. But man, 3 seasons of that was. But there's that speech he gives when he's playing darts against the bad guy, and it essentially turns on him just chiding him for not being curious. Like if you'd been curious, you might have wondered, do I play a lot of darts? And he's like, thunk, and he sinks a triple 20 or whatever. And he's like, oh, as a matter of fact, I do play a lot of darts every Sunday with my dad. It's like that's the problem though, is we have ceased to be curious. And I live for now what I love, especially what I love about this podcast. What I love about life now is the ability and the opportunity to see the world at least somewhat through someone else's eyes and go, how do you see the world? How is this thing that doesn't really affect me? How is it affecting you? And being able to say things like, yeah, I still think we have systemic issues here. You don't have to look any farther than the criminal justice system and see how excessively we police Black neighborhoods and how excessively we jail Black people and arrest them. And they're exonerated at a higher rate by multiple percentage points over their white counterparts because they're falsely arrested more. It's just stat after stat after stat after stat that says if you're Black in this country, you were born with the first 2 or 3 rungs of your ladder taken away. While the rest of us, I take that back. John and I were born on, it's like being born on third base. And anyway, all the terrible analogies that I can't put. But the first barrier to all of that is getting people to even admit that any of that is true. Because like you, we were told this is a meritocracy. The American dream is you work hard, you do what you're supposed to do, and good things will come to you. And gosh, I wish that was truer than it is. I think it is true in a large part for people like John and me. We had the other privilege that John and I experienced was growing up in an intact mom and dad home, with parents who were genuinely good people who cared about us and provided for us and allowed us to do things like go to college and, play music if we wanted to and whatever else, all of those things that, that we took for granted that we've all passed on to our kids, by the way, and so we have a generation now beyond us of kids who have had opportunities to go do things that I'm having to remind them, like, listen, you've had it, there were some things handed to you that aren't handed to everyone. So I don't know. That to me is the challenge for the church is to wake up to the problem and own up to the responsibility and the part they played in some of this problem as well.
Well, part of the problem for the evangelical churches, and again, that's a large amorphous group, and you can't speak for every church. But there is one of the instincts of evangelicalism has been prizing the autonomy of the individual. We see things individually. We see the world through our individual eyes, and in the racism issue, because I am nice to Black people or Hispanics, et cetera, and I don't think that I am prejudiced, then I don't have to worry about anything else. But the problem is not just with me, just my own little individual behavior. Whether or not one is actually behaving in a non-racial manner is a different question. But I don't think I'm racist, and therefore there is no problem. Is not an analogy that holds well. The disadvantages that have come because of past laws, the so-called redlining laws, which I keep being reminded by friends. That's now against the law based upon 1967 Fair Housing Act. But of course, redlining continues today. It continues much more subtly, but the impact of the former legal redlining still plays itself out generation after generation. My grandfather was a secretary of the board of trustees of the college in the neighborhood that I grew up in. And part of the decree for the property where the college stands said, no property shall be sold to anyone other than a member of the white race. I had not heard that until 15 years ago. It was that my own grandfather had participated in that. Well, I grew up in that town, and I know the homes of the Black kids that I played Little League with, and I know that they did not have the same kind of home that I had. And you multiply that, the rising wealth of white people whose home value has increased generation after generation after generation, and Black homes, the homes for Black families that have been redlined, not able to gain that kind of generational wealth. That multiplied over generations, at some point that has to be addressed beyond whether I am nice to people who are different than I am. It's a bigger question than just me.
Property taxes that pay for schooling.
Absolutely.
And go off the property value, the value of the property. And that's where the schools get their money. So, I mean, it's an obvious delineation between these two groups of people who get the money and who don't get the money.
Absolutely.
And who don't. I mean, it's simple economics.
Living in Texas, it is some of the most stark things you'll ever see. There are suburbs of Dallas where the median household income has got to be, I don't know, $500,000-$600,000 a year, and it reflects in their schools. You'll drive by what you'll swear are college campuses and their high schools, and if you talk to anybody who teaches or works there, they'll tell you they are affluent. I mean, they have money to burn in those schools, and these kids have all the technology, and they have, stadiums that would rival a lot of college stadiums. And in Dallas, if you go to Oak Cliff, where the median household income is probably poverty line or below, household, home values are way low, and the schools are crumbling, and they're not getting the funding they need. So, I told my kids forever. I'm sure you told your kids the same thing. We've told people, the pathway out is education. And there's an entire generation of probably multiple generations of people who have been hamstrung by poor representation there. There are still redline laws on the books, I found out. There's a town in Long Island it's not enforceable. I'm sure someone needs to challenge it, but there's still a redline law on the books in this town in Long Island. So I've heard realtors tell me stories that when they're advising Black families who are listing their homes to white up their homes, or maybe to de-black their homes. So they take down your family pictures, and when you get your house appraised, and they've done studies side by side, they've had home appraisers come out to different properties where they've been staged a certain way, and the values are precipitously lower if it's obvious that a Black family lives in this house. So that's the sneaky part of it, right? Like the obvious things that we think, that we feel like we've dealt with are one thing. The individual, like you said, is something you and I can handle and say, I'm nice to everybody. I don't think. The hard part is wrestling with your own biases and prejudices, which we all have to some degree, and then wrestling with those things that are more systemic. So but a lot of this, to me, answer this, or I don't know, opine on this. If you, the Western evangelical church's approach to salvation is so individualistic as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I throw up a little bit in my mouth anymore when I hear people talk about their personal relationship with Jesus, because it's just so cliche. It's such a trite thing to say.
Yeah, the whole notion of personal savior.
Yeah, Jesus is my personal savior.
Yeah, the early church was communitarian. It was deeply invested in people. This notion that my accountability is only just between me and God, and I don't need to care about anyone else. I don't need to engage with anyone else. It's all just kind of me and God. No, that's a high value among many evangelical churches. It's not true. It's not true in most mainline churches. It was not true in the church that I grew up with. And as you guys know, there is a downside. There is a tyranny of the community too.
Oh, for sure.
And we bear the scars of what communities and church systems can do to people. I'm not talking about engaging in the church system when it becomes religious exploitation or abuse, but there's something about people who care about other people, and so that our Christianity is lived in the midst of, and not as opposed to. The individual can be a problem.
Yeah, and in service of a community. Yeah, right. Like the idea that somehow the community lives to enrich the pastor, to provide a livelihood for his entire family. By the way, the whole notion of that, to me, I don't know. It's heartbreaking, because I think some of the rotten fruit of the Reformation is that we lost sort of. And again, this is a good thing, bad thing, but there's no central authority. There's nobody. We don't have a pope who's codifying things, for the layman. And we don't have anyone to appeal to, which is why you have tens of thousands of Protestant denominations, many of which were led by people who are either opposed to education or just not educated. And they differ. Anyway, the approach is strange, and there's so much autonomy given to those. I was one of those, by the way, so I own that part of it. But there is something to be said for a larger congregational type of thing where we're responsible to one another, right? I don't just get to go out and interpret verses, out of context and say, look, this means we need to hate all the gays. Woohoo! Because that's what Paul said that one time in that one place of that one church. Therefore, it's prescriptive for all time. Now, the downside, obviously, is the Catholic Church has blundered horribly over throughout the centuries and the millennia. So I don't know. I'm not sure where the balance is there. I'm certain that the extremes of both sides are going to be problematic. But if I was ever to step foot in church again, it would be most likely into some sort of mainline denomination where there's at least a hint of some accountability. I'd probably check out the Episcopalians. I can't bring either that, or I would join Richard Rohr and become a Franciscan. I think I could see that.
I'm with you with Richard Rohr. Yeah,
he's just I don't know. He just makes me feel good about stuff. Makes me feel good about my own doubt. Really, that's really where a lot of this began, was reading people like him, who were more mystical in their approach and saying, "This is a very, very big thing we're endeavoring to undertake, and we should approach it with humility, and we should be willing to say, I don't know, when we don't know." I love it, but I think I could. I'm not sure I could do the monastic life, but. But guys, I noticed at one point my reading list was a bunch of Catholic / Episcopal. It was Richard Rohr, it was Henry Nouwen, it was guys like that. I'm like, okay, there's those guys who really, really, I think, for their time, especially Thomas Merton, these guys who were pushing us into the more esoteric. Sorry.
Yeah, let me put a plug in for a San Antonio scholar and pastor, and that's Ron Rolheiser. Rolheiser is one of Rohr's closest friends. He is the head of Oblate Catholic Theological Seminary, which is the most ecumenical seminary that I know. His work, I mean, the Holy Hunger, he writes so much like Rohr does. He's challenging, he's open, he's humble. So yeah, you might grab Ron Rolheiser book. Yeah.
Okay. Definitely adding him to the list. San Antonio is such a mixed bag.
Yes, it is.
It's such a weird place. I love it, but it's such a church speaking. I mean, you've got as soon as you get to San Antonio, you pass by Max Lucado's church. If you take the loop out the other way, you get that other goofball. Oh, what's his name with all the end times crap he does? Hagen. Not Hagen. That's not right. Hagee. So he's got his anyway. So there's. I don't know much about Max except he describes himself as a not a very good Church of Christ guy, because I'm pretty sure he has actual instruments and stuff in his worship band. So, but he's Max, so he gets away with it. But it is a very mixed bag of cultures, and John's been there once or twice with me. We need to go back and spend more time there. San Antonio it's just a fantastic place. But how long have you lived there?
This go around 9 years.
Okay.
I was the senior pastor at the church that Max Lucado was now the pastor of.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I know him well. He was a freshman when I was a graduate student, so I've known him a long time. And so that's a church that doesn't place itself within a particular tradition. It was a Church of Christ when I was there, but it was moving toward the Churches of Christ grow out of a unity impulse. It's one that was largely forgotten in the 20th century. But there are some of the congregations that have grasped the unity impulse, and I think Oak Hills is one of those. And the thing that you'll find about Max is that he is extraordinarily humble and sweet. So I don't tend to say negative things about my
I don't.
Pastors in town, but I could never think of anything negative to say about.
But you can talk smack about John Hagee. That's fine. No one will. No, that's fine. Don't do it. I won't. I've always thought Max seemed like a decent fella.
He is a decent person. He truly is.
But at San Antonio, not that we need to talk about San Antonio a bunch, but I went to Air Force Basic Training in San Antonio. So my first introduction was, town pass after I graduated basic training and going to see the Alamo, which was so disappointing.
Yes, there's nothing there.
So small.
Yeah, it's nothing there.
It's like John went. We actually went and saw the eclipse.
Yeah.
You can tell I've been in Texas too long, John. By the way, I said eclipse a couple years ago, 3 years. I haven't how long, but it is remarkable. Most people, when they see the Alamo, they go, "Oh,
yeah,
oh, that's really small. That's interesting."
And the story is more complex than the story that's typically told there too.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Oh yeah.
But it's but I love. I mean, but San Antonio is just growing exponentially.
It's a beautiful place.
When we first moved to Texas in the early 2001, there weren't even 1 million people living there, and now it's got to be pushing 2. But it's anyway, fantastic place. So Roheiser, I'm writing that down because I want to reach. Maybe we can reach out to him and see if he'll come have a chat with us. And because I'm always interested in ways that people are staying connected, because for a lot of us it's just not possible. The church has allied itself too much with a certain brand of politics that for us is harmful. And I'm like, I just can't ally myself very much anymore with that. However, I remain interested at the very least, if not enamored, of the person of Jesus. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. And I think I know a lot of atheists and people who are agnostic who still go, yeah, but Jesus seems like that seems like an ethical system at the very least that I could get behind and say, okay, well, if I can't buy in all the trappings of that religion, I think I can get behind love your neighbor, all those other kinds of things. So I tell you what, I have really enjoyed the talk and appreciate your work. You're not too far down the road from me, so
no, come see me. I'll take you to pretty good Mexican food here.
Okay, see, that's what I need to find because San Antonio is just so big. I need to find the off the beaten path place that only the homies know about this one.
Yeah, you've got my email somewhere, so
I know I do.
Come to town.
We get down that way fairly often between there and Austin, and my son just moved to Dallas, so we've been spending more time in Dallas. But which is a whole nother animal.
And if I come up to Northern California, John, I'll let you know.
Okay, sounds good.
To some wine country, maybe.
Yeah, there you go.
It could get you some good quality weed, but I'm not sure the wine in Humboldt County is going to do much for you. We have great beaches and all kinds of. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world, as far as I'm concerned. And John lives in one of the most beautiful of those places. So he's a lucky guy. I am currently in the armpit of West Texas looking at things that are brown and dying, but it's okay. Fall is coming. So with all of that, hey, just want to remind people that you can buy all of Jack's books in the places where you normally buy books. And I'm sure he's out and about on social media to some degree.
But Grace Sideways is the new one. So
Grace
that's the
Sideways,
one.
That's the one.
Yeah. Grace Sideways, Still Notes of a Doubting Believer.
That's awesome. I think it's a wonderful title, and I think the work you're doing is amazing. I appreciate it again. Thanks again for hanging out with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.